All right. Hello and welcome to this week's Credit Chat Live. I'm your host, Christina Roman, Senior Manager of Consumer Education and Advocacy at Experian. Today, we're diving into a topic that hits close to home for just about everyone: the emotional and psychological side of money. Now, we often think of money in terms of things like income, budget, savings, and credit scores. But behind those numbers are real feelings, relationships, deeply personal stories. From stress and self worth to communication and trust, our financial lives are often driven as much by emotion as they are by logic. So, to help us explore this powerful connection between money and mindset, I'm thrilled to welcome two amazing guests. First, we have Jake Northrup, founder of Experience Your Wealth, a virtual fee only financial planning firm that helps travel loving families find the right balance between planning for tomorrow and truly experiencing life today. Jake is a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst, and certified student loan professional. Also joining us is Ashley Quamme, owner of Beyond the Plan, a consulting practice dedicated to helping advisory firms integrate financial psychology into their work. Ashley is also the host of Planning and Beyond, a podcast exploring the intersection of financial planning and human understanding. Through her work, she helps professionals and all of us see how our emotions, experiences, and relationships shape the way we think and talk about money. So together we'll discuss why money can feel so emotionally charged, how to recognize when financial stress becomes overwhelming, and ways to bring more self-compassion and communication into our financial lives. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jake and Ashley. I'm thrilled to have you.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So I was saying just before we started this recording that I feel like this is a really great time to have this conversation because many people are setting financial goals for the new year. Maybe they're reviewing their spending that they did at the end of the year. And that can be an emotionally charged time just looking back. I know my husband and I just recently did this because we set our financial goals. And I'm happy to have you, Jake, with that focus on travel and financial planning because our goals very much revolve this year around taking some family trips. We've never taken our son out of the country. And so we have a family trip that we wanted to budget for. So we were reviewing our finances and it was really funny because my husband, he kept apologizing to me because when he's at work, he goes to Starbucks pretty often. So I kept seeing Starbucks charge. He would go for breakfast, he would go for lunch. And he was like, "I'm so sorry. I didn't realize I spent that amount at Starbucks." And I was like, "Hey, the money is spent. Don't worry about it. The point is we're looking at it to make a plan for moving forward." And so, I really wanted to emphasize that. So I'm really excited that we're having this conversation today.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great starting point because I think what you just shared is a great example of starting with awareness without assigning necessarily any meaning or shame or blame behind that, right? With you and your husband primarily focusing on, hey, we want to bring our son out of the country for the first time. We want to prioritize travel in the upcoming year. So therefore, looking at your cash flow, looking at your spending, looking at your financial life and saying, how can we prepare for that, right? So you're looking forward while also using backwards looking data to help inform those decisions as well too. So right, even a mental reframe of, hey, it's not about how much you spent on Starbucks. It's more about making sure that we're looking forward and spending in a way that's aligned with our values.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to kick off the conversation with a question for you both. So money can be the most emotionally charged topic of people's lives. Why do you think that money is so tied to our emotions and that sense of self-worth that we have? Ashley, we can go ahead and kick it off with you.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say Jake and I can also rock, paper, scissors for these like joint questions to see
Yeah,
to see who goes
I love that.
because it solves everything, right? That's at least my belief. To answer your question, Christina, money, first of all, I think there's the recognition that money touches every single part of our life. And I don't think we think about it sometimes in that way, but it truly does. And the work that I do with advisors, I have the privilege of working with Jake and Experience Your Wealth. We look at really these 5 core like life domains that money touches, and all of them are emotionally driven, and it touches every single one of them. And so from a domain standpoint, what I'm talking about are things like security and freedom, things like connection and relationship, growth and discovery, right? Like interpersonal growth, health and vitality. Like money touches every single part of this. And so, you know, is money so tied to emotions? Well, it's because it intersects with every single aspect of our life. And so I think just recognizing that because it has so closely tied to everything that we do, like there's going to be emotions that come about from that. And that's okay. It just makes you human.
Absolutely. Those are great points.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that framing too of all the different aspects that money touches because I've said before, money sort of it's like a melting pot of your family, your stories, your culture, your experiences, fears, aspirations, like everything backward looking and forward looking, right? So we want to pay enough attention and mental energy to, what money is representing. It's not just dollars in the bank account, but there's usually a story behind that. And I think one of the interesting things is money is one of the few measurable objective outputs of something that can be quote unquote used as a measure of success, right? You could say like, I worked really hard and this is the income that I earned. I've saved really hard and this is the dollars that are in the bank account, right? So sometimes just knowing that there's a lot of emotions tied to it, but you can tie your sense of self-worth very easily to money because it's easier to measure, right? Versus saying like, how is my internal feeling about my relationship with my kids or friends, right? There's not that easily measurable way there. So I think on one hand, that's a great thing where it's easily measurable. But on the other hand, it can sometimes be taken too far of an extreme if you're tying your money to your self-worth.
I think I would add on to everything that Jake just said. He's 1,000% right. And what comes up for me listening to him say that is that it's also tied to who we are, right? Like self worth. And then how do we see ourselves? What is our identity? And there is a really close connection right there. So working hard, I'm a hard worker, like that's part of our identity. And we might not think of that sometimes as emotional, but as we've seen, I know Jake and I, clients that go to retire or consider taking like a sabbatical, like the work is very closely tied to who they are, how they view themselves, their identity, and that can bring up a lot of emotions for clients.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely ties back to that idea also of just keeping up with the Joneses. I know that my husband will often be like, "Man, what does that person do?" When you see somebody driving like an amazing car, like so it all kind of ties together. It's what do they do and how much do they earn to have that asset that they have? That could very well be the case. They could be making really good money and then they're able to buy this incredible car, or maybe they could be extending themselves beyond their means and trying to make it appear as though they have a certain amount of wealth that they may not have. So you never know what the story is behind a person's situation.
For sure. Yeah. Morgan Housel he's a great author. He wrote The Psychology of Money and he's talked about how wealth is invisible. It's what you don't see, right? So, you might see the car, you might see the house and then make that assumption that someone's really wealthy, but you don't know what's behind that. There could be high debt. They could be working 80 hours a week. They could be not taking care of their health. So much of wealth is not just about the financial assets, but it's about your relationships. It's about your health. It's about all these different aspects of that too. And I think changing that mindset and of, okay, I see this objectively, but that doesn't necessarily translate to wealth, and everyone defines wealth in a different way.
Definitely. A question for Ashley. So, what are some of the most common emotional or psychological challenges you see when people are trying to manage their finances?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So I think some overarching themes might center around wanting like financial freedom, but also wanting security. So I want to be secure financially, but I also want to be able to cut back on work or have flexibility with my hours or a better like work life balance. There's this tension point between wanting security, but also wanting freedom. Sometimes that can be individually, but it can also be within a coupleship. Too, whereas maybe one partner is a little bit more save oriented and another is more free, loose with the with the spending, more about the YOLO here and the now. And so sometimes there can be that couple tension. It doesn't have to just be individually. Uh, Beyond that, there's also, things such as, kind of impact, like what kind of impact and like legacy do I want to leave? What does that look like? How do I talk to my children about that? Within couples, certainly there's alignment related issues, whether that's on spending or just their vision for what they want in the future or even just here and now. I would say to kind of one last thing that we see a lot of is also around this definition of enough. Like what is enough?
Yeah.
How do we define that? And sometimes there can be even an anxiety that manifests from focusing so much on that. So I don't have a short list, Christina, of some common challenges. I would say those are a few that really just come to mind. I guess, Jake, did I miss any? What are others that we might see with clients?
Yeah, I think you hit on the big one. I think what you mentioned earlier, Ashley, was the identity someone has in their financial life. And I think also some of the challenges is that identity might shift over time based on the season of life that you're in, based on what role you might be in a company or with your family as well too. So being flexible to change how you define your role with money, like not I'm a saver my whole life, but maybe I was a saver in this part of my life, but I'm going into a season of life where I have two kids in daycare and I'm doing this over here and I have to save a little bit less too, right? I think that can be a challenge when you've had an identity with money up to a certain point, but then the stakes of the game kind of change, if that makes sense, and being flexible in your mindset and thinking to adapt to that new norm.
Wow, all really great points. I definitely want to touch on that idea of how much is enough. Like, I feel like, especially when I talk to maybe my dad about retirement, and he's like, okay, as soon as I lock in this pension, then I can retire. But then it's like, well, I don't know because I don't know what the market's gonna look like, as far as his 401k. He's like, well, will I have enough? That idea of having enough freaks him out. And therefore, and my mom's like, well, I'm never stopping working. I love working. And she's like, the minute I'm done working, then I don't know what I'll do with all of my time. And so there's so many different, and that speaks also to the seasons of life that Jake mentioned. It's so hard to navigate, like, who do you become next and how do you shift your mindset around that?
Yeah, I can start there and then toss it over to Ashley too, because I think that question of enough, it's such a beautiful question that I feel like is being introduced more in terms of money conversations now versus 5, 10, 15 years ago, where retirement used to be a mathematical problem, right? Like, how do you get enough money to support X amount of expenses so you can withdraw a certain amount, that's safety over time? But people's mindset and vision of retirement is just totally changing at this point. Christine, as you mentioned, your mom might want to continue working, not because she wants to and not because she has to, right? Or, we can now work in a different way that isn't, 9 to 5, grinding your body, everything from that. So the idea of retirement is changing, what that means for people. And it just means that the equation of like saving for the future, saving for retirement is also changing. And what I found too is enough has a definition at different seasons of life. There could be what's enough income that I'm earning right now in a season of life where I feel balance between saving for the future, but also experiencing life now, right? And you could also have a definition of enough. Let's say you wanted to downshift income in the future. We see this a lot with clients where they get into their 50s or 60s and they're not really ready to retire, but they don't want to work that same pace anymore. So what's enough in terms of them being able to downshift income, but not entirely retire as well? And the beautiful part of that, it's a mix between there is the math behind it, which is so, so important, but also there's this just gut feeling and identity around it as well too of, let's say you were that high income earner for a really long period of time, but you want to downshift income. It's going to require enoughness of kind of changing your identity around earning, if that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah, it
I
does.
think I think what becomes uncomfortable and difficult sometimes is that clients have a hard time sitting down and trying to figure out really what that definition is for them in that particular season. And that's why working with a financial planner can be really, really helpful because as Jake said, there is a math, like numbers component to it. There is, but a lot of it is also subjective. And just to reiterate what Jake said, enough in this season might be different than in another season, or based off of someone else's, one client's goals or their vision might be completely different. I think what's hard about figuring that out is that it's just uncomfortable to sit down and define that for yourself. And I think we tend to just go on autopilot then and go, okay, well, enough is just all the money in the world or just more. Like it's just more. I don't want to do, we kind of put our head in the sands and really avoid kind of getting in the trenches or in the uncomfortable feeling. Because I think the reality is that for some clients, what they might find is that they already have enough.
Mm.
And then that becomes difficult because it's, well, if I already have enough from a mathematical standpoint, then what do I do? And I think that is just a big like black hole that like is uncomfortable and it's difficult to navigate, and it's hard to answer. And so this question of enough, like just to kind of wrap this up, is that there is a mathematical numbers component too, but there's also just so much more wrapped up in there. And being willing to get uncomfortable for a little bit to figure out more of the psychological aspect of it. I think that can be where clients really then start to chip away at and find that answer.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the importance of working with a financial professional during this aspect or of planning and figuring it out because you can help clients maybe realize, um, to your point, they have enough. That they're there. I know that there's also, people get nervous about the cost of working with a financial planner, or maybe they feel as though they're not at a point in which they are able to work with a financial planner. And this kind of goes off of the initial discussion, but just because we mentioned it, I think it is important to know that financial planning can be accessible to anybody. And what should people look for when they're going to seek out a financial professional, financial planner? And how do they know if they're in a place financially to do so, if that makes sense?
It's a great question. I can start with it there. I feel like there's a lot of different flavors of working with a financial planner, which is great. And I think the first step is just start doing your research on it, whether it is on Google or some other platforms. But there's different kind of levels of engagement you can have, right? Let's say that you're just starting out. You might have just lower income at this point. You're building your career or you don't have too much saved up. There are a lot of great financial planners that you can work with that might work with you on an hourly basis or just kind of upfront. And that cost is going to be a lot lower, right? And you can take conversations like this and ask that to a financial planner, right? You don't have to completely rely on them to ask some of those questions that we're getting into, right? So you can take some of the education that you can learn from some of these podcasts and articles and everything like that and incorporate that into a certain engagement with a financial planner that might work for your budget and financial situation. And then what I have found is as people progress in their financial journey, things typically get more complex. And if you have higher income or higher saved up, there's just different types of investment and tax and cash decisions around that too. And that's where typically working with a financial planner on a more ongoing basis can be more beneficial. But the downside of that is it's more costly, right?
Mhm.
But I do think you have a nice scale in terms of accessibility that you can get to and the different flavors of working with a professional that you can.
I think beyond just those technical components of the affordability or what does it look like? What does the planning relationship look like? I would encourage clients to also think about how comfortable do you feel with this person, opening up, sharing with them, your, in a sense, kind of financially getting naked with them, right? Exposing those numbers. And that can be very vulnerable.
Yes.
And so paying attention to just who or how does this person interact with me? Like, do I get that warm kind of feeling that I can share with them and open up? Do I feel like they care about me, not just about the numbers that I'm presenting or showing? I think that sometimes we dismiss those more like qualitative pieces. And, I would just encourage you to kind of lean into that a little bit because that can be really meaningful. Ideally, this is a relationship that you're building. Yes, it might be a one-time transaction if, as Jake mentioned, you're early on and the affordability piece is difficult and you just want to get kind of a financial plan. It might be just a one-time transactional relationship, but if it is going to be ongoing, the relational aspect of it is really, really important to pay attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. And how common is it for somebody to go from planner to planner until they do find that right fit? How many people is too many people? Or like if that makes sense, like how much should you be shopping around, I guess, for the right financial planner or having those initial meetings to find somebody that is your fit?
Yeah, it's a great question because you definitely want to do your research. I'd recommend probably talking to at least 2 to 3 different financial planners upon your initial research to interview and see what their style is, see how they interact with clients, how they work with people, and do your due diligence up front. But also, as Ashley mentioned, this is also a leap of faith in terms of going into a relationship and feeling vulnerable there too. So I wouldn't have the expectation that this might be someone that you work with forever. I think it's great to have that intent, if that makes sense, because you want to ideally invest into a relationship, because the longer you work with a financial planner, there's something that I called relationship dividends. And what that means is they have the ability to build on your history and know your tendencies and know your values and goals. And having that history is so valuable, because if a really big decision comes up, you can really quickly recall all of that and know the story that went into it. And so I think going in with the intent that you want to work with someone for a long period of time, but not putting the pressure on yourself to say, I'm going to get it right the first time as well too, because there's a lot of different models. There's a lot of different relationships, things outside of your control. But I think that leap of faith is just the first place to start. And it's really scary, as Ashley did, to do.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, thank you for that. Jake, now when you meet with clients, how do emotionals show up in financial decision making, even for those who think that they may be being logical about their money?
Yeah, I'd say it's almost every single conversation. I'll use myself as actually an example. So my wife and I, we have our own financial planner that we work with, and we're in the final process right now of closing on our house, moving into a new house. And what popped up as first as a logical conversation was, how much house can we afford? And we looked at the numbers, we looked at our income and our savings and our down payment. The numbers said, you can afford this, right? We even worked with our financial planner, got our outside perspective that said, you can afford this. Yet there was this very uncomfortable feeling in my body, because what this actually represented was, a new house represented something that we didn't have this type of house growing up. Or, what are my friends or family going to think if they know how much we paid for it, right? So I was sort of like, graduating out of this level of financial comfort. I was going out of my financial comfort zone. And that's what started as a mathematical problem. But there was this feeling in my body that was, where is this discomfort coming from? I think that's very common for people, where you might see some numbers. Christina, maybe your example that you mentioned of your husband seeing like the Starbucks, like you see the numbers, but what's behind that? It could be that he needs to pay for convenience because he wants to save time to be more present with family or go back to work or things like that as well too. So I think starting with the logical items there is a great start, but also knowing and paying attention to those logical numbers-based conversations or figures are probably going to have some emotions and meaning behind it.
Definitely. That's such a great story. And I think so many people encounter that, especially when they're making such a big purchase as a house. But also, when you mentioned that story about how my husband and his Starbucks runs, he did mention that he works in a very high end area, and all of the restaurants around there are very expensive if he was to go there to eat lunch. So he's like, Starbucks is actually, if you're really going to be honest, the cheaper option of everything around me. So I am still technically saving money. I'm like, yes, that is true. But now let's make our lunches and let's
Yeah,
take our own coffee, because he bought me a beautiful espresso machine last year for Christmas. And I'm like, it's there. You can make your coffee too. But I thought that was funny too, how he was like, he did justify that.
I love it.
Ashley, what's the connection between financial stress and overall mental health? And how can people recognize when it's becoming too much?
ooh, that's a loaded question. I will explain it with a visual. If you can visualize an infinity loop, right? That's maybe horizontally. And, it's a reciprocal relationship. In my mind, at least how I look at it, financial stress impacts, mental health stress, and vice versa. Mental health stress also can impact your financial stress there. And just knowing that they can be, very closely intertwined, I think starting with just that awareness is really helpful. And so if, for example, being laid off from a job, if you or your partner are laid off from a job, that is certainly going to cause financial stress. It may or may not cause financial stress, but it can also lead to things like sleep disruption, maybe even going through a depressive episode or like high anxiety as well. And so there can be just, that's kind of an event and a connection there where a financial stressor can bring about mental health symptoms and be connected there. But the other side of that is also true as well. Like people who are anxious or even depressed or have other types of maybe mental health conditions, that can exacerbate financial stress as well. Looking at, and these are diagnoses, disorders that are in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, looking at things like gambling. That is what we would categorize as a mental health disorder, but there's also a big financial piece to that as well. Even things like bipolar disorder, there can be a financial stress or that can lead to financial stressors there. And so I just think, understanding and realizing like we don't have to know all of the ins and outs and connections there. I think it's just important to know that financial stress, it just doesn't stay contained. It can really spill over and impact all of the areas of our life, including our mental health. And it can come about in ways that maybe sometimes we don't realize. And so sometimes what I might offer is if clients are talking about, well, I'm just having a hard time sleeping, or I've just been really anxious. Okay, well, let's look at maybe what's behind that. I'm hearing the symptoms, right? But let's look at maybe what's underneath. Are there any financial, stressors that are contributing to that? Or if we know the financial stressor, right? We know like what that is, then how is that impacting, all of the other aspects of your well-being in your life? How is it impacting your relationships and your mental and physical well being? So sometimes just knowing that connection is there, it can be a really great starting place. Beyond that, I would say just from like a kind of a checklist standpoint, like if you're curious, one of the things that I might talk about with clients if they're not sure is I might ask, okay, well, in the last like 3 months, like, has this been impacting your sleep? Has it been impacting your nutrition, your physical health, your ability to work or concentrate, focus? And if, there's lots of yeses on that, then, I would say that might be something to pay attention to, maybe even reach out and speak with a professional about that. And that could be a planner. It could be a financial planner if
Mhm.
it is, true like financial related stressors, or it could be a mental health professional or even a financial therapist.
Yeah. And I love that holistic view of the situation, looking at whether it's the financial stress and how it could impact your overall health and advising, or even just hearing those symptoms of somebody saying something as simple as, I'm not sleeping that well. And you say, okay, maybe there is a root cause that could be in your financial situation that we need to examine and help them create that path forward. That's why I was so interested in this relationship between emotional health and how you work with Jake and the financial planning aspect of it, because people don't realize how closely related they are. To your point, it's an infinity loop. So having those both of those aspects addressed could really improve somebody's life.
I'll share from just maybe this doesn't sound like a true mental health like connection or concern, but just in sharing a client story, I was working with a couple who were around 60, and the male partner, the husband, we were just having a, kind of casual small talk chat, right? Kind of starting out. And he shared actually, which is why I gave the example of not sleeping. He shared that he's not been sleeping really well. Like, oh, yeah, like I'm not sleeping really well. It might just be old age. It was kind of what he started with. And so, I just became a little bit curious, like, oh, okay, well, here it might just be old age, but like what else is going on? Like, what else do you think might be under the waters, under the surface there that's contributing to that? And he opened up and shared that he's actually really anxious about the idea of retiring because he doesn't know what he's going to do with his time. Through the conversation that we had, he had not put together that he was actually feeling so anxious that he thinks it's been disrupting his sleep at night. And so, that might not be a indication of like true, like a mental health disorder, but it does impact well-being, to the point that you made, Christina. And so sometimes just being curious about those symptoms, going a little bit deeper, taking it a step further, we might find that, okay, in this case, he's worried about retirement. Hey, let's talk to your advisor. Let's talk to your planner. When's the last time you spoke with them? Well, it was last year. We'll probably do for a meeting here this year. Great. What do you think about? Would you be willing to bring this up to them that you are worried about this, even if it's a few years down the road? And you're worried to the extent that it's disrupting your sleep.
Very
And he was game on board for that. But I don't think, had we not taken that a little bit deeper and become curious, I don't think he would have made that connection. And I don't think that he would have then brought it up to his advisor to be able to look at that, at least now, maybe a few years down the road. But by then, good grief, like he would have lost a lot of nights of sleep and, been really stressed.
Yeah.
And I'll give a shout out to Ashley because she's creating a new path in our industry and bringing it just to a next level. But I feel like these types of conversations, and I think building the awareness and normalizing the relationship between money and our mental health is just going to trickle through in so many beautiful ways, right? If you think about, let's say a couple's considering just something like maybe it's smaller level of like buying a car, right? And it's going to result in an auto payment of $800 a month or something like that. You can start to envision yourself, well, how is that going to feel if that's hitting our bank account on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis or so as well too. And what we found is there's a hidden cost of some financial decisions that also, if we start building awareness to how that might impact our mental health, our physical health as well too, it's going to help you make a more holistic decision, right? You're looking at it at all these different angles. So Christina, what you mentioned earlier about like kind of keeping up with the Joneses is when you look at everything more holistically, everything has a cost. There's a financial
Yeah.
cost, but there's also a time, energy, everything behind that. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't invest in some of these, but when you look at all the different things that you're giving up or need to invest into it, it's going to help you make a better decision with it.
Yeah. And I think that also ties back into how you were talking about looking at how much house you can afford and, purchasing a house. Cause I remember when we got approved for a house or pre approved for a house, the amount that they said that we could purchase, I knew realistically was not something that I wanted to pay for every single month. And even though we were able to buy a house in a crazy market, still a very reasonable uh and a reasonable monthly payment, after we made that purchase, I was stressed. I was like, "Oh my gosh, like now I have to make sure that I'm employed for the next 30 years. Hopefully we'll pay it off faster, but I've got to make sure that both my husband and myself are employed, that, we can meet our needs." And it became very stressful, but as we started to get into it, it felt like, okay, we made the right choice in staying in the amount that we purchased at and having our monthly payment that we have. But there was a lot of stress that went into that first couple of months, I would say, after we made the decision. I was like, oh my gosh, did we make the right decision? But in the end, we felt as though we did do what was correct for our financial situation, and we didn't overextend ourselves too much. But all of that kind of went into the whole process.
Yeah. And that's a really hard part. You bring up a good point because mortgage lender, someone giving you an auto loan or something, they have a formula to tell you how much they will lend you. That doesn't mean it's the right amount that's going to fit into your comfortable cash flow, right? You talked about earlier how you want to be prioritizing travel with your son and bring him out of the country in the upcoming year. So as an example, when we help our clients figure out, how much home they can afford or, how much income to earn or everything, we want to look at everything holistically and then show them, here's where money's going. How do you feel about it? How is this aligned with some of your values? And let's kind of sort of reverse engineer and say, how much can we fit into this home example or auto example without giving up some of the other things that are really important to you, right?
Yeah.
And that's where that awareness to being able to be brave, be courageous, to look at spending, look at your cash flow, feel empowered and educated is going to allow you to say, okay, some of these bigger decisions, what values am I giving up? The answer could be none, but you could draw the parallel between this house means we need to spend less on travel for the next 3 or 4 years. How does that make us feel? What's more important to us from there?
Yeah, definitely. I think that was something that we went through too, because I think our last, you know, big trip out of the country was before my son was born. So, this is this is our first one together as a family, and he's 6 years old. So we did put things on the back burner that we used to really enjoy. And so I wanted to begin those experiences with my son now that we have a little bit more freedom to do so. But definitely the house was a priority for the last 4 years, and now I'm like, "Okay, I feel confident that we can do more things together." And he'll remember it, hopefully.
Take lots of pictures, then he would. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly, exactly. How can couples or families align their financial goals when they have different personalities, spending habits, or priorities?
Yeah, I think first off, bringing awareness to their money stories, their money beliefs. In other words, having a conversation together to go backwards to just understand how their history and stories have showed up in their money decisions before they go forward. Ashley has a great exercise that she brings some of our clients through where it's not for everyone, but some people really benefit from just seeing some of the big money milestones that have shaped their views of money and being able to reflect on, was it a positive experience? Was it a negative experience? When did it happen in life and everything there too? So I think first off, recognizing like you're coming to the table with different stories and hardwired tendencies around money. And you want to build awareness into what's the why behind that, because that's going to build compassion for each other and understanding on where you're coming to the table. So I think first going backwards and then understanding, okay, well, where are we going together, right? Engage in some type of shared vision setting exercise. You can kind of co-create, what's the life that you want to live together? What are some of those milestones? And then third, be mindful about the differences that you might have, right? There's no quote unquote like good or bad around some of it, but understanding, where we've been, where we want to go, and that each of you are going to have different roles behind that just sets you up for success in terms of then moving forward and executing on any plan.
Yeah, I love that idea of going backwards to go forward. That's really important. Ashley, do you have anything else that you want to share on that exercise? I think that's actually really cool.
Yeah, I mean, Jake said, yeah, like spot on, 100%. Yeah, I guess maybe the only thing that I would add, at least what I try to communicate to couples is that, having complementary beliefs, having, complementary strengths is a relational strength. The hard part is honoring each other's differences, honoring our differences as strengths. My husband, he's a CFP, and it has taken in our 20 years together a lot, I think, on both of our ends to recognize that his vigilance around like saving and being detail oriented and creating a lot of financial security, it's a strength, but also, and not that I'm loose with the purse strings by any means, but I do like to spend as a form of enjoyment or spending on things that are meaningful or experiences, things like that. And so it has taken us in our coupleship, being able to recognize that each of us brings strengths to the table. And so when we are going back, as Jake said, and maybe looking at why do we think, feel, and do money the way that we do, and how are we co-creating our vision for what we want for the future, it's important to recognize that each of us are bringing strengths to the table that will help us to be able to get there.
That's so important. And I think it is common to have two different mindsets around money in relationships. That's more common, I think, than not. My husband's definitely a little bit spendier on bigger things, and I'm more spendy on smaller things. But yeah, we're navigating that situation definitely.
I think we all are, Christina. We all are.
Yeah. One question for Ashley. How can you practice self-compassion when you make a financial mistake or a shortfall on your goal?
Well, that's a hard one because I think just the act of self-compassion we are really not wired for. I understand that. I can validate that. The critical part of us, it can be helpful because it evaluates and analyzes where did we go wrong? Like, where did we miss the mark? How can we get better? Um, you know, Brown, Jake and I are fans of, and she has a quote that I actually don't entirely agree with. I don't know if I've ever told you this, Jake, but she says, comparison is the thief of joy. And I actually think that comparison is natural and it can be helpful. And so from a compassion, some self-compassion, I think trying to be mindful of when we're doing that comparison or criticism, when we're getting caught in like that trap, being able to recognize, is this helping me or is this hurting me? And if it is helping, then wonderful. If it's allowing you to evaluate, where can I be better? What can I do next time so that I don't make this mistake or make the same decision? I think that that's really valuable. I think if it is causing more harm, if it's hurting, so if we are ruminating on these thoughts, if we are shaming ourselves, in the sense of like, I always make terrible decisions, or I'm never going to be able to have the kind of financial freedom that I want. Or maybe there's some that have a bit more colorful language in there, some statements. But if we're finding that that internal self dialogue is really more shaming, and it's critical in a way that's hurting, it's not really helping, then I think that's where some self compassion can come into play. And from that place, self compassion can really just look like pausing. It doesn't have to be like, this lovely, like internal dialogue of like, oh, you're so great. Like, you're so wonderful. Like, it's okay. Like, it doesn't have to be all of that. It can just be recognizing, like, okay, I'm beating myself up right now, and that's not helpful. And
Mhm.
maybe I'm going to go for a walk or do something different. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe this time, instead of continuing to make the same decision like over and over and then beating myself up about it, maybe I'm going to do some research on who I can talk to about this and learn how to be or do better. Maybe I'm going to research financial planners. Maybe, I heard that Jake guy on, the podcast and he sounded great. Maybe I'll give him a call and see how I can do that. Self compassion can look like even that as well, taking some kind of action to correcting whatever it is that, we're beating ourselves up about. I think it's really loaded, it's really emotional, it's really difficult. I think if we can start with some awareness of um are the critiques, is the criticism, is it helping or hurting? And then kind of like a flow chart. I explain it as like a do I need new shoes flow chart, like yes or no. Like my answer is always yes when it's that question. But, like, do I need help or is this thought, is it helping or hurting? If it's hurting, right, then I think we can, have some awareness around, okay, what's behind all of this? Why am I feeling bad? To Jake's point earlier, he mentioned like going backwards, like maybe even looking back, like, well, where does this come from? Like, where did I learn this? Well, maybe I saw my parents do this growing up. Maybe I saw my dad make these financial decisions, and that's maybe where I learned it from, or maybe that's where I got this message from, is whether it's overtly or inadvertently, maybe that's where I got it from. So maybe even going backwards can be a form of self compassion.
I love everything that you shared. Jake, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think what Ashley mentioned to you around the self compassion is, I think again going backwards builds the awareness, but also understanding that a lot of your money habits and behaviors might actually be automatic. Like your body is actually used to it. Like if you're feeling a certain way, that could lead to you going to shop on Amazon, or or
Yes.
in other words, let's say that you go on a trip and you spend a lot of money, your automatic behavior might then be, oh God, we cannot spend a lot of money after that, right? So first starting in the understanding of it could be automatic for you, which by definition to change it, that means you have to do things very, very differently, right? And you're not going to be perfect for that, right? It's kind of James Clear has an amazing book, Atomic Habits. I'm sure everyone has read that for the most part.
Love
But
it.
talking about if you're trying to change your behavior around some of this to add some friction in place in a healthy way, put some space in between it, and also know that you're not going to be perfect with it. He talks about how it's more about casting votes for who you want to be, and if you have more votes that versus the other side of it too, like you're going to come out on top, right? So you might not be perfect if you're trying to change a money habit, but if you can vote 70% of the time that you're acting in a way that's aligned with that new habit and 30% the other way, you're coming out on top with it too. So around self-compassion, it's understanding that no one changes their automatic hardwiring overnight. It's going to take time. It's going to take failures. It's going to take experiments. It's going to cause tweaking. But the human part of you is, 6 months later, you're going to be in a better spot most likely, but it's not going to be a smooth line getting there.
Absolutely. Gosh, that's so important, especially for this time of year when people are setting so many resolutions there, whether it's health journeys, whether it's financial journeys. Some people do go to that extreme opposite of where they were before. And it's like, all of a sudden I'm not eating this, or all of a sudden I'm having a no spend month. That could be quite hard. And then you feel already like you're a failure. But recognizing that nobody's perfect, you don't have to be perfect. As long as you're taking those little steps to get a little bit closer to your goal, then you'll start to see those habits change over time. And you'll find at the end of the year, you were much closer than if you had taken no steps to get there or if you'd given up.
Yeah.
Ashley does a great job of this too, of helping clients break down a big goal into very small micro steps, right? So let's say that your resolution for 2026 is you're going to bring more awareness in terms of spending and work on just budgeting and some of those other items. If you first go into one of these platforms and download all your history and see your last 12 months, that could be wildly overwhelming for you, right? Maybe you're okay with it, but also if you wanted to start smaller, it could just be look at your last month of statements, right? Or get a smaller bite-sized pieces from there too. Everyone's going to be hardwired different, but the idea of especially looking at 2026 to say, what's something in my financial life that I'm looking to improve on? You can put some definition around that, but then work backwards to say, okay, well, what do I want to do in the next month, next 3 months, right? And then build on that as opposed to feeling like you're going to do it overnight.
Absolutely. I love that you mentioned that too, because my mom and I this Sunday we're going to do vision boards for our year, right? And so on the trip that we're going out of the country, my parents are actually going with us. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna put that on there. And then she sent me a video last night by Mel Robbins who said that vision boards are they're not productive if you don't list the steps of how you're going to achieve those goals. If you just put grand goals, then it becomes this overwhelming board that you look at every single day of things that you want to do with your life or where you want to be by the end of the year, but no steps for how you're actually going to get there. So I thought that was a really great way to look at vision boards and how if anybody's planning on making one for the year, maybe don't just include those bigger visions, but those little steps for how you plan to get there every single month, those little things that you can do to get there. I thought that was a really cool way to look at it too.
Yeah. I would just add that sometimes it can be really easy. I'm guilty of this too, of having big, grand visions, goals, areas that we want to focus on. And you mentioned like a no spend month kind of there, which made me think about it. I think that while that can be fantastic, also looking at and examining how do these goals really align with what it is that I value. Does a no spend month really align with what you value? I don't know, maybe it does. But if it's like, no, it just sounds like a cool thing and I think we might save like $500, like I don't, from just a place of motivation or being able to take act, like you're not going to be as likely to follow through with that no spend month if it's like, I'm just looking to save $500. And so as you're looking at your 2026 or creating like a vision board, like I would just encourage people to think about, those goals that you have, those areas of focus. How does it really align with what you value and making sure that it's directly tied to that? Because if it is, you're going to be a lot more likely to follow through and to achieve those.
Yeah, that's such a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Your goals have to align with your values. Otherwise, what's the motivation to achieve it? As we're coming toward the end of this conversation, it's been super awesome. I really appreciate all of the insight that you both have shared. I would love for you to share. This kind of goes back to atomic habits. What's a realistic habit that you can start today to build a healthier emotional relationship with money in 2026?
I'd say first, just on the theme of our conversation, acknowledging that it's money and emotions, not money or emotions. So when you're doing certain purchases or big financial decisions, if you can start to bring awareness in terms of how you feel, what your body is telling you, what emotions are coming up from there around different decisions, and start to journal or track it, right? So you could just have something that's simple, like, when I spent this money on here, here's what was going on in my body. Or, when I thought about setting this goal with my partner, here's what came up for me too. So we talked about earlier, I think the awareness in terms of where money is going is crucial to everything, whether you're just starting out in your wealth building journey or, you're financially independent, that's crucial. But I think the next step from that as well too is starting to bring this awareness in terms of what your body is telling you around some of these money decisions as well.
One of the reasons why I love working with Jake is because he and I are very much aligned in our thinking. And this is one of those examples where we are so aligned in our thinking that was going to be my habit is
I
to
promise we didn't talk before again too.
is to cultivate more awareness and some reflection. So I guess that's what I get for losing the rock, paper, scissors battle here. So I would echo everything. I would echo everything that Jake said. And what I would add on to that is, in addition to cultivating more awareness and some reflection, is to map out some checkpoints along the way to check in and just see, like, how am I doing with this? And that could be a conversation, I'll say with yourself, but like that could be like, a meeting that you have with yourself, maybe at a coffee shop or, the park or what have you. It could also be just a checkpoint with a friend that, maybe you feel close with, or your partner, or even another professional, maybe your financial advisor or a coach. But I think I am all for like reflection and awareness. And if you want to take it up just a notch and go beyond that, then map out some point in times for you to be able to have a check-in. So that could look like monthly. It could look quarterly. I would say somewhere between monthly and quarterly is a good rhythm, just because if you get too far beyond a quarter, we tend to forget. We don't really remember. And so if you wanted to start out even every other week, depending upon the goal, I think that that's fine too. But go ahead, and as you're mapping out some of these goals, plug into your calendar when those checkpoints are going to be for yourself.
Yeah, really important. Thank you very much. If there's one thing you want listeners to take away from thinking about the emotional side of money, what would it be?
I guess maybe just the takeaway, there's really two. One is that I just like to validate for people that this is hard. It's not easy. And it's okay if it's not easy, if it is difficult, if it is emotional. So one, like from a takeaway, is that it's okay if some of this is hard, whether that's individually for you or even within your relationship, that's okay. And the second piece would be is that if it is hard, or even if you just want to be proactive and learn how to do things better, that it's okay to reach out for help or to do some research. And that might look like, Jake mentioned earlier, like some reading or listening to a podcast. It might also mean talking with a professional, and just chatting through. And we don't have to go to a professional because something is, really, really wrong. Like, we can proactively seek out professional help because we want to move from just being okay to really thriving. I would just validate that if it's hard, that's okay. That's normal. That's, very common. And it's okay to reach out for help and to talk to folks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm just happy she didn't steal mine. It was
Dang it.
amazing. It's going to compliment
Dang
it. But I
it.
think, to summarize, I'd say money and financial planning, everything that we talked about today, it's an art and a science. And I think the art piece is personalized to everyone. It's centered around your money stories, your histories, your emotions, your values, where you want to go. It's the why that's guiding everything. And we want to marry that with the science. And the science is the saving, the budgeting, the tax planning, the investing. And that's the how, right? So both are really, really crucial, but you can't answer how without answering why. And I think a lot of people start with the how without knowing the why behind it. And if you don't know the why, that's where it's really easy to give up or not want to change your identity in terms of some of the money habits that are behind it. So I think just that awareness and education around there's an art and a science. And even if we think about comparison with others or anything from there too, just know their art piece and their why is probably totally different than your art piece and your why, right? And that gives you the permission to say, you're playing your own game, you have your own rules. And that's the motivation around a lot of just building healthy financial habits.
Wow. I love that. That was amazing. That was like a mic drop to end the conversation. Thank you so much, Jake and Ashley, for your insight today, for your wonderful answers. I hope that our listeners have learned a lot about the emotional aspect of money, how their emotions and finances are intertwined. And my hope is that they want to reach out to you both to learn how they can work with you. So I would love for you to share how our listeners can find you. Jake, we'll go ahead and get started with you.
Sure. Yeah. You can go to our website, www.experienceyourwealth.com. That's the company. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, just Jake Northrup. You'll see I'll probably pop up there. So I don't do as good of a job as Ashley. She posts amazing podcasts and videos and everything. I'll maybe throw something out every once in a while, but lots of different platforms to connect.
Similar to Jake, you can find me at my website, www.beyondthefp.com. I do hang out on LinkedIn quite a bit. And Jake is being very humble and modest because he puts out fantastic content. It may not be quite as often as what I do, but when he does, it is so insightful and so valuable. So both of us like to hang out there. You can check us out there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Credit Chat Live. You can find me on X every single Wednesday. We host a credit chat conversation that touches a different aspect of personal finance. So definitely check that out on Wednesdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Christina Roman. And after you listen to this episode, if you would be so inclined to share a financial goal that you have for 2026 with me on LinkedIn, I would love to hear it because I'm always interested in your financial goals and what you thought about the episode. So thank you so much for tuning in today. Thank you, Ashley and Jake, for joining me today. I can't wait for our listeners to hear this episode.
Thanks, Christina.